Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is Monday. It is for those of you who like, I hate Mondays. I don't know. I'm getting out of that funk where Mondays is becoming one of my best days, where I feel energized and where I feel as though, I can conquer the world and all my goals. I can accomplish all my goals. So I want to thank you very much for joining me here today on another episode of Women Making an Impact Live. I'm so excited to speak with my guests today. But before we go into that conversation, I just want to give you an idea as to what the goal is of Women Making an Impact. And it's to provide you with the tools and the resources and the strategy that you need to build your confidence, amplify your voice, know your worth, and dress like the leader that you're becoming. If you're watching live, say hi, let us know that you're watching live, show some support, give us some love. If you're watching the replay, we welcome your comments as well, your questions as well. As we go along throughout this conversation, we will be taking those questions, so make sure that you drop them in the comments. I'm Solita Roberts, founder and image coach here at Style to Impact. One of the things that led me to want to talk about this conversation is because there is this notion that society expects women to be warm, they expect us to be nurturing, but as leaders, they also expect us to be decisive and tough, right? We have to have that masculine energy. And if we have too much of it, it's like, oh, we don't think you're quite ready for those leadership roles. So joining me today is my guest, Leslie Hughes, and we'll be talking about the challenges women face in the workplace and how to get ready for leadership roles at work. Hi, Leslie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me today. I absolutely love the work you're doing, and I'm excited to be here with you today.
I'm excited to have you as well. It's such a pleasure and such a journey that we've been on to be able to get to this conversation. But I think it's such an important time to have it because we've experienced quite a few things with women in the workplace. Women, because of the pandemic, had to leave the workplace. So whether or not that was to take care of their kids, whether or not that was to be caregiver to someone else in the home. But a lot of women were don't want to say forced out of the workplace, but had to make that decision to leave the workplace. And now we're also experiencing where persons, and I'm hoping it's women as well, who are saying that we are going to determine what the direction of our career is, and we're not going to stay in working with companies that don't support us. Whether or not it's childcare, whether or not it's ensuring that we have the necessary benefits and resources that we need to grow in the positions that we want to get into. So before we dive into today's conversation, which I'm super excited about, I want to know from you, can you share with the audience, like, who are you? What do you do? And what led you to start working within this leadership field?
Absolutely. And Salita, you had the perfect introduction because I have to say a lot of what you just shared about the double bind that women face in the workplace really led me to the work that I do now. It's my passion and my purpose to help women learn the skills and traits and develop the confidence that they really already should have, because there are so many badass women out there doing
Yeah.
amazing things. But we find that we struggle with imposter syndrome on a regular basis. And that's because the systems weren't necessarily created for our success. And if you're a woman of color, if you're a mother, if you're LGBTQ, if you are any sort of woman at the intersections of additional oppression in certain kinds of ways, the workplace is even that more difficult to advance. And so one of the things that led me to my work as a women's leadership coach and educator is this desire I have to help women remove some of the guesswork of what is it like to succeed in the workplace? What is it like as you advance levels? What are the characteristics and traits that you need for executive presence? Because my mission is to see more women at the top. I don't believe that we'll see change in our society. We won't see the support we need for any of our populations that are at the margins without those people being in positions of power. So really, that's underneath why I care so deeply about helping women really sift through very normal leadership questions and opportunities for growth. So, what I like to do is think about with my clients, how do we expand your impact right where you are? So, there are so many different levels and opportunities for women in the workplace. And what I like to do is meet them where they're at so that I can help women expand their beliefs, their behavior, and their impact with the intention of seeing more women climb that ladder and shatter that glass ceiling despite various barriers on the way.
Yes, I love that, right? And I think this is why, our work is so important, because there's so many women out there who suffer from this. No, I mean, I suffer from it as well, right? You know your capabilities, you know what you can do, and there's this little voice in your head that's going, no you can't. No you can't." And sometimes we allow that to overtake us and allow that to really determine how we go about advancing our career, right? Because we're listening to everything else that, or everyone else, and telling us, where society's telling us that we're not capable, that, we're not, we can't have it all, and we're trying to figure out that work life balance and go through those different aspects. And one of the things that I've, like, in my career as well, is that, you're told that as a woman, that you have to work harder, that you have to be the one that clocks out last, that you have to be the one that shows up first, that, you have to do all these different things and more if you want to elevate to that leadership role, which we all know at the end of the day is not true. It's not, who clocks out last. It's about who works smarter. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female, but how you do that. What are some of the strategies that you use to help, to help women to understand what that process is when it comes to success? Like, what do they
Right.
need to get to that success level?
Yeah, Salita, and again, you hit the nail on the head already, which is the system was not designed for us. So there are very intentional myths within the system, and some of those are the narratives of, you have to work harder and be more present. Some of the narratives really are out there. Like, not, how about this example? Not sharing salary information, right? That's a
That's
cultural
it.
norm that
Yeah.
exists, and that's a huge detriment to women in particular, because we're still building, I think, our narrative of how we support each other in the workplace, what mentoring looks like, what sharing resources and skills looks like. That's something that the generation above me didn't have the same ability to do what my generation can in the workplace. And so from that, I think there's been a break in the pipeline of women being able to support other women as they're climbing too. So that, I
Yeah.
think that's a real big message, that we need to talk about the way that the systems are broken and the way that the systems are really intentionally kind of holding us back. If we don't know what people make for their salaries and women aren't sharing that kind of information amongst each other, how do we know how much to ask for when the time comes? How do we know if we're underpaid? That's just a really very small cultural um, point,
Yes.
I would say, that really is behind the work that I do with women leaders, because it's really about understanding. Earlier I talked about beliefs. You talked about that too, when it comes to that voice in the back of our head. The truth is, we can't necessarily influence systemic barriers from the outside looking in. And
Yeah.
so, I'm not, my framework doesn't exclude that those systemic barriers exist. But the framework that I use to work with women really helps them align what they're in control of. So you asked, what do we need to do to be successful in the workplace? Well, we really need to have an understanding of the fact that our experiences inform our beliefs, and our beliefs, good and bad, form our behavior, and our behavior, good and bad, forms our impact. And that impact that we have on ourselves and other people influences our experiences. So it's
Yeah.
a cycle. And what we can control in the success scenario is our beliefs, behavior, and our impact. And those are the things that we do to when we're challenging our beliefs, we're challenging beliefs that don't serve us, that get in the way of our ability to be as successful as we know we can be. When we're thinking about our behavior, we're thinking about how do we adapt our behavior for the outcome that we desire. And some of that is learning to play the game. Some of that is learning to be controlled in our responses and to know that um, sometimes it might feel really, really, really good to tell somebody the truth in a situation, especially
I
where maybe they're coming for you, you
Okay,
know?
I want to talk about
Yeah,
the two things that you said there that I think we need to explore a little bit more,
sure. Yes.
because you're tapping on two of my pet peeves, so to speak. The
Okay.
first one is where you talked about we don't share salaries, like we do not share it. And it's because the system was built to say that, you know, be secretive about it. We don't talk about monies within our homes. We don't talk about monies at work, because it's like, if I am making a penny more than someone else, I don't want to say that I'm making a penny more than, more than Suzanne, because it's like, ooh, I've been able to get what I want. And I think, honestly speaking, I've experienced that in a company that I work with, where no one knew what the other person was making unless they were signing and writing the checks. And I remember one day I asked a colleague of mine, we were coming up on negotiating our contracts, and I asked a colleague of mine that we were in the same on the same level, but she worked at the company maybe 2 or 3 years before me, but we were doing the same thing. And I asked her, like, what are you making? And I got that. Why? Why? And I'm like, because if we know what the other person is making, then we're able to negotiate from a position of power for both of us. Right. So
Right.
I think that's a conversation that, I mean, it's kind of like different from what we're talking about today, but it's such an important aspect of really stepping into that leadership role, is not shying away from those difficult conversation and really breaking the barrier of things that are once accepted as norms. How can we change that, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So once we become a part of the power as leaders, how do we critically examine the systems, philosophies, the cultures of our organizations to make sure we're not repeating the exact same problematic
No.
mistakes that keep other people behind?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's so, and we have to start thinking about it, not when we get into the position, but before we get into the
Right.
position, identifying what are those gaps and what are some of the things that you're seeing in your organization, or maybe an organization that you want to work in. You're probably not working in that organization at the moment. Like, what are the gaps within not just society, but in that organization that you think needs to change? And is being able to confidently speak up and say, I think this is wrong, right? Or I think this should be changed, or this a new approach should be taken to it. Which brings me to the other part of what you said. It's about being where and I'm going to paraphrase here, so forgive me
Sure.
if I don't get it right. We're talking about when we're speaking up, to being mindful of it. I want to talk a little bit more on that, because I am of the belief, it's something that I'm working on now. I'm getting better at being a little bit more diplomatic but direct. I've
Yeah.
always been 100% direct. Like, I'm that person. If I have a problem, I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm feeling, using the words, like, describe to you
Right.
exactly how it is. And it's not always conducive in the working environment, but I don't want ever, women to ever think that we have to, and this happens sometimes, that we have to be passive in our responses, and we have to be
Right.
passive in how we bring about change, and we have to be passive about, voicing our opinion. It's like, no, I want women to be direct, but at the same time making sure that they're not holding back from who they are. So let's talk about that for a moment, because stepping into that leadership role and wanting to step into that leadership role, we tend to think that, okay, if I want to advance my career, I can't be that boss, right? I can't be bossy. I can't be, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to try and be submissive and say yes and no,
Right.
when really and truly what I want to say, mm-mm.
Exactly. No, I mean, I think you've really captured the crux of the issue of women walking the tightrope in the workplace of being seen as soft and friendly and warm enough, but also competent enough and serious enough. And it's quite frankly a very impossible expectation for us to be those two things.
Absolutely.
And as somebody who I have definitely been, I would say, anybody who's ever met me would probably consider me to be outspoken. And so I definitely have navigated a professional journey in which I have been the person speaking up in the workplace. I have been the one questioning things and being direct. I loved directness. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's part of my culture. I'm from the Midwest,
It makes
and
things so much easier. Tell me what's
people,
happening.
yes, people are direct where I'm from, and so and women are pretty outspoken where I'm from too. So my first job was actually in the South. So I moved from the Midwest to the South, and it was a big culture shock for me, and it taught me a lot of lessons about how my behavior, my directness impacts other people. So, despite the fact that I feel comfortable with it and I prefer it in those I work with, especially women, I love a direct woman. Not everybody feels that way. And so,
Yeah.
that's the piece where we need to understand how do we not go the exact opposite direction, which would be avoiding being honest and direct. But how do we, as leaders and as women in the workplace, how do we find direct and effective ways of approaching difficult situations? And that's what I help women do. That's what I help my leaders do. So, there are, before I mentioned our experiences, our beliefs, our behaviors, and our impact, right? You can kind of think of that as on a loop.
Yeah.
And many of us continue in that loop because we have behaviors, both good and bad, that are familiar, that have been informed by our experiences, by our traumas in life, and by our pleasures in life, right? It's just we're complicated human beings
Yep.
with a mesh of responses in our brains. And so, what I help leaders do is focus on learn. So, Lead with Dr. Leslie is my site. So, I would invite anybody who's watching to visit me at leadwithdrleslie.com. I do explain my framework there of how I work with leaders. And LEAD is an acronym. And what it stands for is the L is learn. So great leaders get curious, and that's about their beliefs and behaviors, and also other people, getting curious about
Yeah.
other people. I think that's really important. Um, and then the E stands for evolve. And my belief is that great leaders, when they learn new things, they adapt, they adjust.
Love
And I
that.
think that's a really key component of being able to evolve and expand as a leader. And the A stands for accept the challenge. And that is about accountability. And that could look like a lot of different things: accountability in our habits, accountability in how we're speaking to ourselves, our internal dialogue. It can be the accountability of going out and finding women mentors who can help do the things that you and I identified earlier, right? Unveil some of the secrets of the industry and the workplace
Yeah.
and coach us towards our success. So, accept the challenges about what do you need to do now that you're a leader? What do you need to do to be a good leader, a great leader? And then do would be action oriented. So, great leaders take action even when it's difficult. So that's the thing that I really help women use this framework to problem solve around what's happening in their lives, what's happening in their careers. How do we unpack these things and get you into patterns of behavior that help you achieve your success goals?
I love that. I love that. And for those of you who haven't catch what lead means, I'll put it into the comment section so that you can see what that is. Before we move on, I just want to say thank you very much for, those in the audience that's joining us live. I see you, Flo. I see you. I'm not going to try and mess your name up. I'm so sorry. I don't think that's something I should do, but thank you very much for joining. I appreciate you ladies being here with us. So I want to talk about just looking at your acronym and talking about being accountable and being able to just going through the old process. I shouldn't even say just looking at it's about leading and learning and taking action and doing. One of the things that I've noticed, like in my working with my clients and trying to get them to break free from that, you know, dress code that we were given as women to wear in the workplace and embrace more wearing clothes that's more of them and being more
Right.
ambitious and being more and expressive in their personalities, because what you wear does tell certain aspects of you. It's
Yeah.
storytelling. You can tell certain things about me based on what I'm wearing, right? You can do some certain guesses. So what I found is that women don't lack, because there are women in my business that I work with. They want to dress well. They want to show up looking differently. They want to break free of that uniform. But of course, we have the constraints of society telling you what it is and the tradition of what it was, and you're trying to like not step on anybody's toes and all of these different things that happen when we're thinking about being more self-aware and being more expressive in terms of what we wear, right? That's the thing that I've noticed with my clients. But what I've noticed as well is that women don't lack ambition. Women don't lack the desire to be more authentic and wearing clothes that represents who they are.
Right.
Some of them lack the confidence,
Right.
right? And not only when we're talking about positioning ourselves for leadership position, is that we lack that confidence in our abilities. So at the end of the day, like getting dressed, we don't take risk,
Right.
right? And I
Right.
find that lack of belief women having themselves is what's stopping us from exploring, whether or not that's exploring a different wardrobe, whether or not that's exploring other opportunities within the workforce. How do you help? I know you talked about it a little bit, but can we like bring that down more concrete now in those action steps? Like, how do you help leaders develop their self-belief?
Yeah, so I love that example too. And I've definitely been in positions before where my appearance was heavily judged based on the culture I was in. So
Yeah.
I worked at a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics institution for 7 years.
Wow.
And yeah, and I mean, the culture there was amazing in so many ways. It was such a brilliant environment to be a part of. But my feminine appearance was something that was questioned from the get go when I started my work there. I got comments daily about why was I so dressed up for work, and I didn't consider myself to be that dressed up for work. I considered myself to be very femininely dressed for work
Yeah.
because that's what felt really great to me at the time. Long hair, curly, heels, dresses. That is what, and it was Southern California, so it was so hot, so hot. So, I definitely experienced the barrier of not being taken seriously, actually, in an environment, in some cases, based on my feminine appearance. And so I can really relate with that. And I think one of the things, I actually just had a really great conversation with a colleague. It's going to be up on my December episode of Lead with Dr. Leslie, Alicia Pennington. I called her a colleague, which she's not a colleague, but she's an awesome friend that I met on Instagram who teaches people how to begin their businesses. And in
Friends
this
can turn into colleagues as well.
right,
So
exactly. We're all colleagues. We're all connected. We're all doing the good work.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so, we had this really great conversation about the fine line between expecting bias and experiencing bias, and how very difficult that is when you are a person who has an identity who does regularly experience bias. I think that what happens for us is subconsciously we tend to expect bias based on our experiences, right? So if we go back to that same loop I was talking about, our experiences inform our beliefs. And the truth of the matter is, some experiences we have are bias and many are not. And so that's the work we have to do, which is really, really mentally taxing in the workplace, is kind of unlearning things that are there to protect us and things that we've been taught based on our
Yeah.
experiences, and questioning ourselves. Am I just anticipating not being successful for, in your example, dressing the way I really feel the most comfortable? Or has there been data in my environment that shows me it's not a safe choice to make? So really sorting through what is in our minds versus what is our reality. And I think that there are some work contexts in which maybe it's not going to help you professionally if you are more expressive. And to that, I would say, time for a new work environment.
De- Definitely. I was going to say the same thing as well,
Right?
because
Yeah.
if you're going to tell me I am too feminine, like I'm dressed too feminine, feminine means to me that I chose to wear a pleated skirt or a ruffled shirt instead of a white button down looking like my male colleagues. If you're going to tell me that I need you to fit into this traditional old misconception of what professional looks like, and as a woman, you should not express your femininity, you should not express who you are, then you need to definitely find a new environment, because style is about self-expression. It tells me a lot about you when I see you, how I connect with you, and it helps to build those
Yeah.
relationships, right? And and we're thinking about being a leader. You need to be a leader that inspire. You need to be a leader that motivates. You need to be a leader that someone looks up to and say, you know what, that's where I want to be. I love the way you show up. And if you try to show up in a cookie cutter way, it's
Right.
not going to help. And if your environment requires you, like I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and one of the comments that was made, that if you're working in an environment or people around you who are telling you that you should show up in that traditional, that way that you were once, because those uniforms weren't built for us, there were no consideration for
Right.
women,
Right.
and that you should, because it's kind of ironic that you said this just now, I'm trying to remember the exact quote, it, but basically saying, don't take the advice from people who are still dressing like they're living in an era that we have long moved past, and we are progressing on trying to progress as women in so many different levels, that I should still show up that way. It's like,
Right.
no, like, no.
Right. And I think that that's a huge red flag in a culture. And, so it's if you are in a culture who's telling you, we do not value your identity as a feminine woman, well, and I'm not sorry, I want to also be clear. My culture wasn't necessarily saying that. It was a challenge I chose to rise to the occasion about, and had a lot of it was an opportunity for me to have conversations with people which I felt comfortable enough about,
Yeah.
and to be able to say, I actually chose hot pink for my nails because I wanted you to ask. Like, let's talk about how women, and I was a role model for students who were women coming of age in this environment. And so a lot of the conversations I had were, let's talk about how you can be very feminine, very fashion forward, very expressive, and you can be brilliant. You can be both of these things. Shocker, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's like, no, there's no and or. Like,
right.
yeah,
And
I have it
so,
going on.
yeah. And so I think if you're in an environment where you do have those data points that I mentioned before, that um, you deciding to express your identity in this environment is not going to turn out well for you based on real things that have happened, it's time to go. It's time to move on, because you cannot be the most successful version of yourself unless your identity is welcomed, unless
I love
you
that.
are embracing your identity and using your strengths to the best of your ability, And that does not happen when you're being stuffed into a tiny little box.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. Now I can have this conversation and we can talk about, because there's like so many things that you're talking about. And I'm like, uh-huh, this is gonna go longer. Like I can have this conversation with you
Well,
all
how
day.
about if I invite you? I'll just take this opportunity on air. I'll invite you onto an episode of Lead with Dr. Leslie, and we can keep this conversation going, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I would love that. I would love that. And we hate to see good things, good conversation end. So I would absolutely love that. It would be my pleasure to be on your show as well. So as
Great.
we wrap up today, how can viewers get in contact with you? How can they reach you? And what is that one piece of advice that maybe you have gotten in your career, or maybe you have given to a client when it comes to really preparing themselves for that leadership role that you want to leave with our audience today?
Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with me is to go to my website, leadwithdrleslie.com, or follow me on Instagram. It's at Dr. Leslie Hughes. So DrLeslieHughes. I post tons of free content there about leadership strategies and advice. I'm launching a course that will be live in the next few months. So if you want to get on the list to learn more about that, I help women learn how to lead. And so one of the biggest tips I think I would give, as somebody who I would call myself a proclaimed skeptic, is to really focus on, if you're a leader, creating sacred alone time in which you are able to do your rituals, whether it's meditating, prayer, journaling, self-reflection. I urge every leader to really focus on turning inward for at least 15 minutes a day, because you're leading other people. And it's probably the most important 15 minutes of your day, in my opinion.
I love that. I think that's a great strategy. Just kind of like internalize and center yourself and know, okay, I'm leading from a place of positivity and I'm leading
Right.
from a place of creating that impact and influence that I need. So I love that. I absolutely love that. So I want to thank you very much. It's been such an honor to have you here. Now, before we wrap up, I want to say this to our audience. If you're watching live or you're watching the replay, Dr. Leslie, I haven't called you that once, but I'm calling you that. I'm giving you your title. Dr. Leslie talked about your identity, and I think it's an important aspect of who you are when it comes to leadership, who you are when it comes to showing up as a woman in your femininity, in your power, in your space, and being able to have that influence that you want. And clothing is a part of your identity. What you wear does tell a story about you, and you get to decide. And especially now when we're talking about looking for companies that are more in line with our values, right? You get to decide what that is. You get to decide what that story and narrative is that you want to tell about yourself. And clothing is one of the ways that you can do that. So I want to invite you as well to book a consultation with me. Let's talk about your style journey. Maybe you are going through a process where you need to do a style reset because you've lost it due to the pandemic. Let's have that conversation. You can book a style consultation with me. I kind of made it easy as possible, which is at bit.ly dot it's, let me give that again. It's bit.ly/book a style consultation. I'll put that link as well in the comments. I'll put Dr. Leslie's information as well in the comments. Now it's time for women. We've been doing it in small pockets. We've been doing it, and going under the radar, but it's time for women to really make a bold step and a bold statement into leadership position, because we need more women in leadership position. We need more women stepping up to the challenge and saying, yes, I am here. I
Yes.
am willing to lend my support, my voice, and I'm willing to create the changes that we need. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as well, Dr. Leslie. It's an absolute pleasure to have all of you watching the replay or watching the live as well. We appreciate you being here. Until next time, have a fantastic week. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.